Mighty, and we've got some great information to share with you. The people from the Treffert Center are here, and as part of my job, I get to work with them on a daily basis, and they are a gem on our campus, and so I am really proud to be able to bring them to your audience today. We're going to start with a reflection. Because of the patient, I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's a nice reminder of why we are here. Because the patient has a need, we have a job to do. Because the patient has a choice, we must be the better choice. Because the patient has sensibilities, we must be considerate. And because the patient has urgencies, we must be quick. Because the patient is unique, we must be flexible. And because the patient has high expectations, we must be the best. Because the patient has influences, we have the hope of more patients. And because of the patient, we exist. So housekeeping, I think I see familiar faces here. You're pretty versed in how this rolls. You can win some prizes if you fill out your green card. Yay! The yellow cards we take in consideration when we're planning future No One Goes. So please put your comments on here, things that you like, things that you didn't like, things that you might want to hear us present in the future. So please fill those out. And then this is the future No One Go dates that we have. I do want to bring to your attention that the September 13th No One Go has been canceled, so we will just have a bye. And then we are preparing for one more before the end of the year, probably in November, so we will update that. Please watch in your My News for details on that. So here we go. In 1943, Dr. Leo Kanner used the word autism to describe a group of children unable to relate themselves in the ordinary way that people do in situations from the beginning of life. Since then, scientists have come to regard autism as a spectrum of mental disorders ranging from very mild to sometimes very severe. Present day, we have close to nearly a century of additional research that has been added to Dr. Kanner's development and treatment options in the world of autism. In 2018, the CDC determined that approximately 1 in 59 children can be diagnosed with the autism spectrum disorder. And this is a 15% increase, and it is expected to climb. Our very own Dr. Daryl Treffert knew Dr. Kanner and went on to start the Child Services at Winnebago Mental Health Institution, where he met his very first savant. His journey led him to becoming the leading expert in the field of autism and savants. Dr. Treffert and the multidisciplinary staff at the Treffert Center are sought out for advice and clarification on subjects of autism, hyperlexia, and savants daily, and they receive emails from all over the world. Dr. Treffert and the multidisciplinary, oh, I read that already. Let's see here we go. I'm just gonna jump in. I am the gatekeeper of those emails, and I'm amazed, and I work with Mason on how vast this is. We hear from people from India, we hear from people from Spain, all over the United States, Egypt. It amazes me, the people that know our Dr. Treffert and then call and reach out to him when they have a child or a family member and they're seeking some validation or hope or some answers for their family members. So today we have two of our autism experts here, and they will bring you up to date into the history of autism and where we are today in 2019 at the Treffert Center, and talk to you a little bit about the Treffert approach. So we have Meg Putty, she's a board certified behavior analyst, and Brian Mishler, he is a licensed clinical social worker. So let's bring our experts forward.
Thank you, Melanie. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to share what we've been doing over at the Treffert Center. So I'm going to get us started, but then we'll pick up at the end with the best part of the presentation with Brian finishing us up. So today we're going to talk about, as Molly mentioned, the shift in perspective of autism diagnostics. We're going to talk about the wonderful work and the options that we have available at the Treffert Center, dig into what the Treffert approach is, and then give you guys some real-world examples of the Treffert approach in action. So, as Molly mentioned, the brief history of autism, first described by Dr. Leo Kanner in 1943. This was then called early infantile autism. The word auto, or that piece of the word, really meant that they saw children as locked within themselves. As we transitioned from the 40s into the 50s, how autism was caused was really blamed on the parents and their environment. They actually had terminology called the refrigerator mother because children developed autism from their perspective if their mothers were cold and uncaring. Luckily, for the next 32 years to now, we've had a lot of transition, and we'll talk about that as we move forward, but it really was initially considered an emotional disturbance. As Molly mentioned, since that time to now, we've seen a sharp climb in the autism prevalence that we've been seeing. So in 2006, our numbers were about 1 in 110 children, moving to 1 in 88, 1 in 68, and now we're at 1 in 59 children are diagnosed. What we know about this is the disorder does start before the age of 3, and it's characterized by persistent deficits in everyday social communication, behavioral function, and we'll see some restrictive and repetitive behaviors. Autism is almost 5 times more common in boys than girls, and there's a lot of research going on into why that is, and some of that is awareness as well. As we discussed about that shift, initially the diagnostics and the DSM broke down autism into different conditions. So we would have PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified. We would have Asperger's syndrome, and we would have autism. Initially, we would look at what we would consider high-functioning autism or classic autism, and it would be this spectrum. Where we've moved to today is really a shift to an umbrella term of autism spectrum disorders that encompasses all of those areas at different varying levels and degrees. This is our most technical slide that you'll see today because it really does want to break down what that diagnostic criteria is and what we're looking for that medical diagnosis of autism, which we do here on site at the Treffert Clinic and at the hospital, so we'll talk about that a bit later. So autism spectrum disorder refers to that range of neurodevelopmental disorders with similar features, characterized by social relationships. So we might see young children seeming to ignore other children, play with themselves, play away from their peers. They might seem to not understand the social norms or rules that we're picking up already at the age of 2 and 3 in our developmental process. Communication, we'll see difficulty understanding what others are meaning, difficulty expressing their basic needs and wants. That social communication ties in that social relationship and communication category. And then the restricted interest. So we'll see play with toys, not as we would assume we should play with toys or the typical sense of how we would look at it. We might consider this uncommon interest if we're looking at a typical developmental trajectory, or repetitive or stereotype patterns behavior. This is really that technical description of autism spectrum disorder, but we really like to remind people that it presents differently in all individuals. And so we take these categories and recognize them, but also take a shift in our perspective. So put simply, we look at autism as over or under connection in various areas of the brain. And so these are pictures of, this is Temple Grandin. We'll talk about her in a little bit. She's coming to visit us in October, just 2 months away, I believe, so we're really excited about that. But unlike on the top, which is our control brain, Temple Grandin has her lateral ventricles on the bottom brain that are significantly larger on the left side of her brain than her right. So you can see right here how that's a different wiring of her brain. And this is just one example. There's a lot of really interesting research happening looking at the different patterns of development in the brain and autism. So today's challenge, now that we have that basic information, is really how do we interpret that to really understand individuals? How do we use that to treat individuals? But how do we think about it differently so we're seeing that individual first and really recognizing the strengths that autism brings to the table? So who does that best and has guided us all along the way is our Dr. Daryl Treffert. And so I am going to read this one quote from him, word for word, because it's so important for us to recognize. So Dr. Treffert says that autism is not a single condition, but it is a shared common path for a number of conditions and causes, including autistic-like conditions, as well as classic autism disorder itself. As elsewhere in medicine, the first step in treatment is to make a diagnosis. Our team provides a careful and caring, comprehensive, multidisciplinary evaluation to provide a proper diagnosis, and then, equally important, to recommend pertinent evidence-based intervention strategies focusing on particular abilities, rather than disabilities. So it's really that shift from that deficit-based approach to a strength-based approach that we're working for. And where do we do that but here in Fond du Lac at the Treffert Center? So this is a picture of our building that we're so fortunate to have thanks to the support of Agnesian Healthcare and SSM Health. And we really are inviting families to explore that potential that lives with us all. So while we're going to talk about autism more specifically today, we will also broaden that out because the Treffert approach really works for all individuals, and that strength-based approach is what we're embedding into all that we do at the Treffert Center. So Brian's going to help me out by talking about a few of the different pieces that we have today, but the Treffert Center encompasses many different things, and we continue to expand with our community connections. So in our hopes, this slide will continue to grow with more bullet points of all of our connections and our reaches out to the world. Currently, we house the Treffert Academy, the Treffert Center Library, the Treffert Clinic, and then Agnesian Beyond Boundaries of Autism, often referred to ABBA or ABBA. We don't discriminate there. So we'll go through each of these places and talk a little bit more about what they are before we get into the details of the Treffert approach. So Treffert Academy is where we provide a relationship-focused learning environment to help children with social-emotional growth. We do this through movement and play. So even today, I was like, okay, the cameras are here, but I'm a mover. I'm always all over the place. Our teachers are moving a lot. We recognize that movement helps us learn, that movement is really what kids need, and play is the best learning of all. Our emphasis is on fostering greater diversity, equality, and inclusions in our classrooms. So the Treffert Academy serves our children on the spectrum, but also serves all children. So when we look at that, where do we serve children? We have full-day preschool, half-day preschool, sometimes referred to as a 3K program. Morning and afternoon 4K last year. This year we've got a really great class in the morning. We've got 4K wraparound care, before and after school care, including transportation. We have a wonderful Mr. Tony who drives our kids throughout the areas of Fond du Lac and North Fond du Lac. Half-day and non-school care, and summer and school age program. So the biggest things that we're looking at the Treffert Academy and our philosophy is what we call our big three. And the reason these are so important for us to focus on is because we know that 95% of the brain is wired by age 5. So when we think about that, what an impactful period in our development and how much impact we can have on our future society, individuals, population, by really focusing on these important factors, because we continue to grow, and I hope that we continue to grow past 26, as I'm sure we all do, but it's a much slower rate of development once we hit that year of 5 years old. The 3 strongest predictors that we know that will show life success and have a strong future is social emotional skills, self-regulation, and empathy. So we build this in and weave it into our curriculum and all that we do at the Treffert Academy, and that really is the backbone of the Treffert approach that we'll discuss in more detail. Teaching these skills in movement and play-based environment is our focus, as I've mentioned, and like I said, it really works for all children. The Treffert Library, I'm going to let Brian talk a little bit about, because he's really involved in our research projects happening there.
Absolutely. The Treffert Center Library houses a lot of the collections of art and books that Dr. Treffert has collected over his long career. We also do a wide variety of research on hyperlexia, savant syndrome, and autism that focuses on shared characteristics. We're looking at what types of gifts and talents these unique kids have. Hyperlexia, which is early reading, so finding there seems to be a separation between people who have early reading and develop autistic-like characteristics that seem to kind of fade away or disappear as they learn language, and as kids around them, their peers, reading catches up to them. So we're looking at providing possibly a separation of diagnostic between hyperlexia 1, 2, and 3 that would lead to better treatment for those kids, but always focusing on that hyperlexic piece of their ability to read as a gateway to help with that treatment. And then looking at the exceptional abilities and talents that many of these people in this population have. So we have several ongoing research things that we can access through the Trevor Center website that people can go in and fill out those databases so that we can collect as much information on this population as possible.
I keep going.
The Trevor Clinic, so that's kind of my area, so I do psychotherapy there with kids on the autism spectrum and adults as well, and provide groups that focus on kind of social engagement. We do psychotherapy that focuses on often the anxiety and depression that come along with that. We have a nurse practitioner, Tammy Langhoff, that handles a lot of the medication things so that we can coordinate with Tammy on symptoms and stuff that would come along with medication. We have Sonia, who's our occupational therapist, so she provides occupational therapy. We have speech and language, and we do a variety of biofeedback and neurofeedback as well to help with symptoms that many of these kids might have.
And then as we referenced earlier, ABBA, Ignition Beyond Boundaries of Autism, this is our autism-specific treatment program housed at the Trefort Center, but spans beyond as well. We offer comprehensive behavioral treatment services based on Early Start Denver model, ESDM, which is a developmental approach which relies on the principles of behavior, also known as applied behavior analysis. The big focus at ABBA and throughout the Trefort approach is that relationship first focus, really recognizing that relationships are the foundation to success for all of our children. And so being able to connect with that individual and identify their strengths really allows us to push them forward and make progress and helps us to progress as well. Our focus is also on family partnerships and community partnerships. So without our families and our wonderful community members, we wouldn't have nearly the amount of success that we do. Currently, we're serving 11 counties in the surrounding Fond du Lac area, center-based and home-based treatment. So some of our children will receive services at the Trefort Center in the academy, right alongside all of the children that attend there. We also have some center-based sites with our community partners in the Green Bay. We have some in the Oshkosh area and North Fond du Lac School District. Home-based is really where at the heart of our treatment, so working with families within their home environment, and community-based services is getting out and doing things in the real environment. So we preach that we need to work where these children live, and so we really make sure that we're getting natural environment opportunities for them to learn the skills where they'll use them. And lastly, we have some great relationships with many local schools where we will provide treatment within the school setting to help with that transition from preschool and behavioral intervention into a full-day school, public or private. So now we get to the really good stuff, you guys, and we're going to go into the details of the Trefort approach more specifically. So here's our overview of the Trefort approach, and if you listen closely, you've heard all of these words embedded into our description of the Trefort Center and how we view autism. As Dr. Trefort's quote referenced, our first step is really making that correct and differential diagnosis, recognizing that we need to focus on those strengths. So that shift from that deficit model to the strength-based model is really what sets us apart from other approaches that you see across the nation and the world. Natural environment I just referenced, but it's really those hand-on experience, developmental perspective, and I'll go in more detail into this one as well, but that's where we look at development, but also that development of relationships, sensory aware, and then our systems approach. So we'll talk about all of these a bit in detail and then give you guys a really great example. So our differential diagnosis, as we referenced, that can happen through the Trefort Clinic. And so we're really making sure that we're involving that person, the parents and families, and that team and others that know that child really well. So we collaborate with our local birth to 3 providers, our school districts, to really gather that history of our children during the diagnostic process, so we can make an appropriate differential diagnosis that's going to be correct, so that we can really build a profile of what are these children's strengths and where are they shining, how can we use that to tap their full potential, but also where are those areas that we need to help support a little bit, and how can we recognize those. Individual and strength-based is the second pillar of our spanning approach, and this is really looking at the child and identifying their strengths. And I love the quote that if we see a child differently, we see a different child. So we're looking at the strengths and looking for those positive behaviors and those things we can build upon changes our whole perspective and our approach with all of our individuals. And while we say child a lot throughout this because we're focusing on our work at the Treffert Center currently, Brian's going to show it us at the end, but this spans for all of us and all individuals. Continuing on the strength base is really how do we cultivate that strength? And so we strive to help every child become an expert in something that they really care about. And so we're rekindling that love of learning, we're rekindling that love of play and connection, and it's a lot easier to get engaged and find new ways of connecting with other people if you're doing something that you love. And so we talked earlier about the restrictive and repetitive behaviors being a category within the autism spectrum disorder diagnostics of the DSM. While that's a category that would, in a medical model, say that's a deficit-based checklist, right? We're looking for these behaviors that they're impeding their ability to interact with others, and it's repetitive and it's uncommon interests. We say, let's flip that on its head, and let's say, okay, this child really loves trains. Maybe they are a little repetitive right now, but how do we get into that world and expand upon it, use that strength to encourage and foster growth in other areas? So we find that by doing that, and instead of trying to diminish those things that may be seen in a typical view or a medical model as something that is excessive or something that needs to be decreased, a behavior that we would target for reduction, if instead we welcome that into our treatment and we build upon it, amazing things happen. Natural environment really is that hands-on activities, teaching our children different skills across our playground at the academy, within their homes in our treatment program. Brian has a nature group he's got to run off to at 9 a.m. this morning so that we can get some of the kids out into experiencing nature. And it's really about cultivating those opportunities to practice our skills and learn them in areas that matter. We all know that if we're doing things in an environment that it matters, it's going to be more meaningful to us. We're going to hang on to that a lot longer. Brains are wired through hands-on interaction with the physical world. So we really make sure we're incorporating that. Our developmental approach is really what we've been talking about, is looking at that typical trajectory of development, but not just in children, for all of us. We're all continuously learning at all times, and so we'll recognize those areas that we're doing really well, but also those areas that we need to grow. We also recognize in this developmental category is that development and focus on relationships. This is really where that big three comes in, because we know those are the biggest predictors of success. Why are they the biggest predictors? Because they enable people to make strong relationships. And soft skills, such as having the ability to have conversations with people, the ability to self-regulate, to have empathy for those are what make all of you successful in your work every single day and your personal relationships. And so we really look at that developmental process of individual skills, but also the ability to build strong connections. Sensory aware, this is where our Sonia really helps us out, but it's embedded throughout more than just our occupational therapy, our entire approach. So we're aware that we're all filtering at this exact moment different things from our environment. So we have lights coming in, different sounds, and we know that everybody does that differently. Some people will have sensitivities to different sensory experiences where they'll be really hyper aware of different sounds. Others will be hyposensitive, and so we really look at what are those modifications to our environment that will make it welcoming for all individuals to be successful. And then lastly, and arguably all of these could be equally important, is our systems approach. And that's really our collaboration with others. As we mentioned, we have lots of community partnerships, and we continue to grow on those: education, home, community, school. As Molly mentioned, across the world, we're collaborating daily with individuals looking for things to learn more about activities that we have, opportunities to learn, but also so they can bring that home and spread that across their communities. A huge predictor of success for all individuals, but particularly for individuals on the autism spectrum, is having that strong connection and relationship with a mentor, somebody that they look up to, and Brian's going to share more about how he embeds that into what he does in the future. Our community connections also fall underneath this category, so we're happy to be a participant of the Youth Apprenticeship Program, where we have individuals come in and learn, high school students learning this approach very early so they can bring that into their future careers. We work with school districts, we do research, the leadership and creative media groups, and as I referenced, so many invited guests and speakers coming. Grab a flyer about Temple as you head out, because we're really excited to have her back. Here's a sampling of some of the events that we've had at the Treffert Center, and the list just keeps on growing. So we've had Sheila Frick, excited to do some research with her. She's doing some groundbreaking stuff in the world of occupational therapy. Phyllis Cooperman really helps with our work in hyperlexia. And then we have Ping Leon, and we have Temple Grandin, Jason Pageant. We could go on, and I could fill up this whole hour just telling you their stories, but I'll just give them a shout out so that if you're interested, you can look into them to learn some more. And one of the most exciting ventures that I'm currently involved in, along with our team at the Treffert Center, is collaborating with the North Fond du Lac School District to bring this Treffert approach to their school district. So we're consulting with them on a charter school that they're opening this fall, so that we can expand that reach of the work that we're doing to the public education setting. Okay, so finally we get to an example of the Treffert approach in action, and we're going to show you a video. That was a picture of Dr. Treffert playing with one of our little guys, Justice, and he really does touch all of the pieces.
Well, I
of the
always
center.
dreamed of having children.
You're good.
Lucas and I focused on our careers as military veterans first. I had a very easy pregnancy, enjoyed reading all the parenting books, and felt more than ready when Justice arrived 2 days after my 35th birthday. When we brought Justice home from the hospital, I felt like all of my hopes and dreams had finally come true. But in my heart, I knew something was really off. Multiple professionals told us it was just colic, growing pains, or a temperamental personality, and he would eventually outgrow it. He showed little interest in traditional toys, yet was obsessed with advanced shapes and the solar system. At 9 months, he held a pen like an adult and could draw near perfect shapes and most letters of the alphabet. At 18 months, we realized he could read, even though we never taught him.
We often get calls from frantic parents who are scared and worried. We understand that parents are concerned and often desperate. Our first task is to listen and to understand.
I searched the internet and found an article about hyperlexia and Einstein syndrome written by Dr. Daryl Treffert. I read it in shock, as it completely described Justice. I felt immediate relief, full of hope, and decided I would take Justice wherever in the world Dr. Treffert was located.
The Treffert Center is the only center of its kind in the world. It is a center for all children. We look for that island of genius in all children as we navigate the journey together.
Justice met with Dr. Treffert when he was just over 2 years old. We started taking him to the Treffert Center twice a week for therapy. Within a few months, Justice started talking. This was a miracle, as Lucas and I had resigned to the fact that Justice might never speak. I was driving and suddenly heard Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, coming from the back of the van. He then started using full sentences.
Justice is an astonishing example of hyperlexia and Einstein syndrome. When you see a child like Justice, the first thing to do is to make the correct diagnosis. Justice is a remarkable example. He came to us without speech, and within several weeks was speaking, and now is describing the periodic table, the solar system, and all sorts of other obtuse subjects that sort of out-Google Google. The outcome for hyperlexia and Einstein syndrome is very positive, and part of our message here at the center is that it is a condition with a good outcome, giving relief and hope to parents and families.
The Treffert Academy is for all children. Through an integrated classroom, children with unique abilities work together and celebrate successes. They learn through play and movement. It's so important to be part of an inclusive environment.
While Justice is still a very unique child, his ability to communicate and socialize with others now is priceless. Using the Treffert approach and teaching to the talent, Justice receives individualized therapy from a specialized staff of professionals trained in hyperlexia. Justice, while still obsessed with the solar system and academically advanced well beyond his age, now laughs and enjoys everyday life like an average child. The skills and knowledge given to us by the Treffert Center staff has enabled us to integrate Justice's world into ours and ours into his, which has been life-changing for our family.
Thank you. So Justice is one of countless examples of families that we have had the privilege to work with and opportunity to touch. He's a great example to share today because he did come to the center, but also had home-based services, school-based services, touched the Treffert Clinic, worked with Brian. And so it really, what we're hoping for is to be that one-stop destination for families where they can access the treatment package and the care that they need in one place across our different disciplines. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian as he's going to share another real-world example of the Trefford approach.
So one of my biggest prides at the Trefford Center was putting together this leadership group. It kind of started when we were on a community outing and I had expressed, we were talking about things that make us anxious but we do anyways because they're a good opportunity. And I was talking about presenting at the Autism conference. And one of the kids that was there, these were teenagers, said, well, what's an autism conference? And I was kind of like, well, that's where people without autism talk with other people who don't have autism about what we should do for people with autism. And I kind of, you know, in that moment, I was a little bit like, you guys should probably be involved. and they said, well, the one kid was in Boy Scouts, and he goes, well, when we want to go to a camp or something like that, we do a fundraiser. Could we do a fundraiser and go to the autism conference? And they wanted to present right away, and I was kind of like, why don't we just go see what it's like before we do that? So they put together a fundraiser, and they raised a considerable amount of money and were able to go. It actually funded about 3 years of these kids being able to go, so they did an awesome job. The second year we presented, and the group as a panel, and they did an absolutely amazing job. They had the crowd laughing and crying, and so many people came up after that and said, you know, we really feel a sense of hope for our kids because of what these kids had presented. But within the context of that panel, there were kids that were interested in writing, and kids that did acting, and other kids that were interested in art. And now we've kind of switched the idea. We started a leadership group which looked at aspects of autism that would be valuable in vocational settings. And Tara, who's now part of the creative media group, was in that in the audience at the time, and she came up and said, I'd love to work with these kids. She has had a career in Hollywood and did some acting and some behind the scenes work on many movies. So she kind of came in, and we kind of switched the focus then from what we were doing previously. We still do the vocational stuff and the leadership stuff, but we started incorporating project-based activities that looked at all of these unique skills, because we had writers, actors, artists, musicians, and we were kind of sitting there going, well, it's almost like a mini production company. So we used that kind of theme to kind of engage all of their unique talents and abilities so that they could participate and share their abilities to do, to come up with a single project. And here's a short video on what they've been up to. So the group is set up a little bit like the Boy Scouts, where the older kids kind of help the younger kids. It starts at teenage and goes through adults. And going back to that mentoring idea, Tara was able to bring in people that she had connected with in Hollywood. So we had actresses that were able to Skype in, people who did voiceover for video games and cartoons, to talk with the kids, musicians, to come in and kind of give advice and how their lives work through using those unique mediums to create job experiences. I was like wondering when the slide was going to move forward. That's my job. So areas of leadership development that we looked at, we looked at redefining leadership, because a lot of times these kids are like, well, you know, so many people say that I'm not capable, so I can't be a leader. And we really switched that to within the skills and gifts that these kids have, they're absolutely spectacular. So that leads to the next one, teaching to the talent, finding out what unique talents and gifts everybody has and using those as the focus rather than focusing on our struggles. When we develop teams, we don't go, okay, you're really bad at this, so that's what you're gonna do in that team. That would be a terrible, you know, experience for everybody that would participate. So these kids get to engage their passions through group activities and project-based learning. Find your inner leader. So we did things like, we did personality tests, because often these kids only view themselves through the perspective of autism because that's all they've heard. But every person with autism is uniquely different. So we tried to find a way for them to kind of see their own unique personality underneath their autism diagnosis. Executive function, so that's kind of how we learn how to do things that we need to do. Planning, organizing, self-regulation, using our past experiences. Goal setting is another thing that we do. Happiness in the workplace by focusing on passion and those gifts. Public speaking, they seem to do an absolutely exceptional job anytime that we've had them present. Through that experience, because when you go and it's like, okay, you're gonna have to present to 300 people and you've never done this before and they have autism, I'm like, well, this could like blow up in our faces. But they did an absolutely amazing job, and it almost seems like they have anxiety, that people, like presentation anxiety all the time until they actually get in front of a group and they can perform and talk about the things that they love and they're passionate about. We talk about the strengths and struggles. It is a little bit like group therapy for them. Professionalism, like how do you know how to dress for a job interview? What should I prepare ahead of time? What is the expectation of how I should behave in the workplace? And then conflict resolution. So there's definitely some kids whose characteristics and traits sometimes trigger other kids, so they have to figure out how they're gonna work together within the concepts of these projects. So within our media group, we have many artists, musicians, actors, audio video editors, and kids that are interested in marketing and social media. So we've kind of used those things to create, like I said before, a mini production company. Executive functioning. So we still have treatment goals. Our executive functioning, they work on working memory, flexible thinking, self-regulation, planning. How are we gonna schedule these things out? Social communication. Obviously, during the context of engaging within the project, they have to communicate what they want to do. The writers need to be involved with the actors and the writers and the video editors all have to work together to make the story that they want to put out cohesive and finish projects on time. And then social emotional skills. So often when they get a project, the first thing is an overwhelming sense of anxiety. How are we going to do this? So we have to, work out and plan out how should we feel. We have a actual sheet that we go through. Here's the opportunity. How should we feel about this? We should be happy that we get an opportunity instead of stressed that what if we can't do it? And then we kind of go back to, I always kind of fall back on, you guys are exceptional within the context of the things that you're great at. So how can we use those talents and give you the opportunity to show people what you can do? And that usually subsides that anxiety, and they're happy to be able to show their unique talents and gifts. I think this is a great quote. There's no passion to be found in playing small and settling for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living. I think that applies to the kids we work with. Community connections. So these kids have worked. They presented at the ASW conference. They presented to foundations to earn money. They presented to the Diversity Council here. Created several advocacy and instructional videos. The videos that we saw, the one that we saw, they put together. They've done art shows and music performances. That was the group that presented at the ASW conference. So artwork. This is a couple of the artwork pictures. So this is one of my favorite ones. This young man was in math class. He's a math savant, but needed to show his math skills needed to show his work while he was doing his math, and for math savants, that's very difficult. They just see the equation and they see the answer. So for the rest of us, we need to show our work to be able to figure out the answer. But for them, it's like, I don't know what you're doing. I look at it and I see the answer. So now I've seen kids just write down random numbers and, you know, try to figure out what it is to make it look like they're doing what we're doing, but it's always a struggle. It created a lot of behavioral issues for him. Through his second semester of his senior year, they were having him in math class, and they were finally like, you know what, he's not gonna get it. They're like, what other class would you like to take? And he's like, well, I'll try art. And this was one of the first 2 pictures that he drew after never having picked up a pen and a piece of paper before. So where do we go from here? So I think that what we've learned is that within the context of your unique, and that's probably true for everybody, within the context of your unique skills and abilities, we all have a place in society and community. And these kids still have a yearning to be a part of something bigger than themselves. That's how we develop self-esteem. So I think that what the Trevor Center does the best is not look at this as a disability, but a unique ability. And I think that that's the message going forward that provides the most hope for families with kids with autism.
Thank you. That's it. So we can take some questions. But yes, just really happy to share what we're doing at the Trefort Center with all of you, and explaining the Trefort approach and giving you some real world examples of the success that we had. And like we said, these are just small pieces and of countless stories. But the greatest piece is, I think that every day we learn more from the individuals we serve than we're able to teach them, which continues to grow our approach and considerations that we make in our next steps in bringing this across our nation and the world. So excited for some questions. Yeah, Molly.
Can you explain to the group about the Academy and that it's for all children?
Yes, so the Trefort Academy, as Molly mentioned, currently we serve 2.5-year-olds to 12-year-olds. But we're really hoping to have an exciting announcement soon, because we're working at bringing that age down lower and hoping to reach younger children sooner. So in a successive plan, we're scheming on how we can start this earlier, because we know that all children coming in benefit, like we said, from our curriculum approach. So we infuse the Trefort approach in all we do, and we know that teaching all children, whether they have a disability or do not have a disability, will benefit and grow and have a much more successful future if they are in a movement-rich environment that is focusing on the development of those core skills that will help them in their adult life. So we have classrooms, and most of our children there have individual differences amongst and different talents, whether they have a disability or not, but the large percentage do not, and so they're able to grow in this environment that really recognizes their own strengths. And we've had some really great connections between our children who may be receiving NAPA services and not, that will be lifelong friendships between our individuals. One of our favorite stories was when we first opened our doors and we were just getting our first round of kids into the building. We had one of our younger children on the spectrum who was still developing how to use words, and he was in the hallway and having a bit of trouble. And we had a tour coming through because the paint still smelled. It was fresh on the walls. And the family was kind of looking over, and the little boy's like, oh, it's okay, he doesn't talk yet, but he's a really great friend. Come in and let's play and I'll show you. And so that's what we're looking for, is that acceptance of all of us and how that can change our perspective. You know, if we know our strengths, we know what we can do. That applies to all of us, but if we can recognize other strengths, wow, are we all gonna go a lot further together. Any other questions? Anything to add to that, Brian?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a grandma of a recently diagnosed grandchild with sport. How can I be better at, when I watch him or spend time with him, what are some things that I can do to help support him or make his environment better?
I would say by asking that question, you've already taken the most important step, and that's, recognizing, that we do have the ability to impact others by our own actions and how our seeking to connect with them. There's a lot of great resources we'll have to connect later that we can put you in touch with, but the biggest foundation is how do we build that relationship. Brian often says you start with the heart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that, Brian.
And I would say what she was saying, sometimes we see behaviors that look unusual or we say that they're useless, but they're really seeing the world in a completely different way. And to engage with them in what seems like useless behavior, like lining things up. The first thing I do with a kid that lines things up is sit down and start lining things up myself. There's something unique about that, whether it's mathematical or visual, spatial, that eventually becomes often a unique skill or talent. So you never know. There was a Graham, they call him the eco-artist. He used to just tear paper and tear paper and tear paper, and people thought it was a useless OCD talent. But he ended up making these amazing artwork and murals out of the pieces of paper that he would rip up. There's stories upon stories of what used to look like behavior that was not functional becomes a very unique skill or talent. So never kind of, to participate in that. Oftentimes I think that my connection with the kids when they come in with these abilities is I often say, show me what you're doing, teach me. And that experience of teaching somebody else what it is that you're doing or participating in those things, they feel connected then. Like this is the first time somebody wants to play with me. They still want to play, but the play looks different. So to participate in that will really help.
We often say kids do well if they can, and if they're not doing well, something's getting in their way. And so it's always looking at what's happening in that situation, and if there's something that isn't going well, why? What do we need to support? What do we need to change? Because it's not the child that needs to change or the individual, it's the correct supports around them, it's the environment, and so it's that tweaking of that support system that's going to help that child be successful. Good luck. Let's chat later.
Thank you. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
I hope that you all felt the love and the legacy of our Dr. Treffert is living on through the team over at the Treffert Center. So we've got a lot of good work to do, and please share the message that the Treffert Center is for all people, for all children, and the Treffert approach works not only for autistic children and people on the spectrum, but when you're working on your teams in your own departments, look at the strengths of the team, look at the deficits of the team, and then play to that, and it will make you a more successful team. This doesn't apply just to people on the spectrum, it applies to everything. Let's build on our strengths and be empathetic and kind to one another. So, who's going to win something today?
I don't know. We have two Ignatian Healthcare no